The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely of the creator and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the listener. Listener discretion is advised. Hey guys, welcome back to Under the Moon Paranormal Ohio Legends. What can I say? Today we are talking about my hometown. It's where I grew up. It's an okay place. So where we left off, my town was arresting Jesus. I'm not here to talk about that story. Or I'm not here to talk about the 4th of July 2017 massacre or the murder of a 7th grader in 1999. Nope. We're not here to talk about the thumbtack attack of our football team either, or some racist cheerleaders of the whole Trail of Tears mask thing that they did. We're not here to even talk about the 2020 senior that kidnapped herself either, that made headline news. Nope, and although all of those stories are available on DuckDuckGo or Google or whatever you prefer to search on, I'm not here to judge, we are going back to the beginning. Thanks to my local historical society, I have a lot of knowledge about some old ghost stories and a few people that put Greenfield, Ohio on the map. This is the home of Johnny Paycheck, which is our first notable person. So settle in, will ya? Let's dive on into this crazy story of Johnny Paycheck. We're going to play that for you in just a second. Sorry, still having some technical difficulties on how I'm setting everything up here.
To remind you of a country song? Paycheck's trouble started here at the North High Lounge. He came here last night around 11:30, drinking with some friends.
He was drinking beer and whiskey, you know. I don't think he was really that drunk. He just started talking to some guy and he told him, I don't like your actions. And they got in an argument. Before I knew it, then jerked out a gun and shot him.
He was shot. You could see where the bullet went in, and you could hear there was an angle, and it come out the top of his head here. And according to the doctor, reported his skull went up.
You wouldn't be Mr. Wise, would you?
Yeah.
What happened last night?
Well, I just thought, well, I got to get rid of this. I thought he killed him, really, you know. Guy fell to his knees and he got up and run. And Paycheck ran.
Paycheck had left the bar after the shootings occurred, and he was arrested by a line of police officers, Clinton County Sheriff deputies, and residents of the bar.
Johnny, what happened?
No comment.
To remind you of a country song?
You can find that clip on YouTube on my podcast reference playlist. It's called Archives in 1985, starred Johnny Paycheck shot a man in a bathroom brawl. Alright, so that's about all we're going to say about old Johnny Paycheck. If you were ever in Greenfield and want to look up some old articles of Johnny Paycheck, they are at the Traveler's Rest right by Save-A-Lot right as you come into town, or you can go to Community Market, and inside where you can eat at the deli, they have a whole bunch of articles and pictures of Johnny Paycheck, as well as a great big sign when you're driving into town that tells you this is the home of Johnny Paycheck. So, enough about him. Let's go way back to 1799. Located halfway between Columbus and Cincinnati, Ohio, on the west bank of Paint Creek, a small community in the northwest corner of Highland County, in the fall of 1799, Duncan MacArthur, a Revolutionary War veteran, platted out the town of New Philadelphia Plan, a grid of rectangular streets and parallel avenues. Originally part of the Virginia Military District, Highland County was formed in 1805. Outside of the towns and villages, property lines resemble the patchwork quilt and not the usual square township plan of the rest of the Northwest Territory. The first person to settle here in 1799 was Joe Bright. He was a native of North Carolina who had immigrated with his father's family to Ross County. Originally, he settled in the High Banks just a few miles south of Chillicothe. But not liking that locality, he moved to Greenfield at the time when Greenfield had actually existed only as a name on a piece of paper. He built the first cabin where the Harper House stands. He died April 4, 1842, in Michigan, where he is buried at the Prospect Hill Cemetery. Greenfield was an important stop in the Ohio River to Canada route in the Underground Railroad. Newspaper accounts report slave catchers attempting to collect runaway slaves. In the generation after the Civil War people began to speak about what they had seen, or heard, or done to aid runaway slaves. The society created a Paint Creek Freedom Trail for a short driving tour to follow major locations. I used to live in a house on South Street that was part of that Underground Railroad, and that basement was pretty wild. It had rooms I didn't even know was there for like the first year I lived there. So Greenfield is part of the Underground Railroad, so that's pretty cool. Moving on, Greenfield was home to the Patterson Car Company, the first and only car company owned and controlled by African Americans. C.R. Patterson began with the buggy shop, which his heirs developed into making of cars and buses. The Historical Society has archival photos of the Patterson school buses lined up in front of the school campus. Edward Lee McLean perfected a detachable horse collar pad and went on to create the American Pad and Textile Factory that evolved into a company with product line that inclined life-saving vests for military in the World War II. So we're going to talk about C.R. Patterson for a minute. Born in Virginia, his family made it to Greenfield circa 1842 and was living here accordingly to the 1850 census. For many years, the Patterson Company produced numerous types of horse-drawn vehicles. In 1873, he went into partnership with a white man, J.P. Lowell. Patterson assumed sole ownership of the company when Lowell sold his share of the company to C.R. in 1893. The product line includes buggies, backboards, phaetons, rockaway, and surreys, the area's most popular wagons. His son Fred joined in the firm. With Fred's direction, the firm turned its attention to the automotive age that was taking over the carriage trade. It became the first African American automobile manufacturer. The Patterson Greenfield Automobile was introduced into the Greenfield Republican newspaper on September 23, 1915. This new line of business was dependent on having a lot of capital, and that was not easy to acquire, so the Patterson Greenfield automobile never reached the mass production level it should have. Pattersons also turned their attention to production of school buses, which were a big demand by Ohio schools. As I sit here in my studio, looking out my window, I wonder if Paycheck's old song, "Take This Job and Shove It," was maybe about one of the factories in town. And as someone with experience that's worked at both the factories that Paycheck worked at, I mean, I can totally relate to the song. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about Edward Lee McLean. Greenfield has a beautiful school that is almost like a museum. Let's learn about the man that founded the building of Edward Lee McLean High School. When Edward Lee McLean was growing up in Greenfield, he worked at his father's saddlery shop. Saddlery, that's how it's spelled. It's old-timey. It's from the Historical Society's webpage. I'm sure it's like a saddle shop. Many times he watched customers putting old blankets or burlap pads on the horses to protect them from rubbing on the leather harness collar. Young Edward decided that there should be a better pad that has a low cost and is easy to put in place. He designed a pad made of cloth and stuffed with cotton. It would be open at the bottom, so it would be easy to fasten on the horse's neck. He also designed clips to hold it in place on the horse's collar and had a local blacksmith made some of them. He received a patent for the clips from the U.S. Patent Office in 1881 when he went into business of manufacturing these new horse collar pads with 2 employees in a rented out 10 by 12 foot room above the bank. In 1887, Edward Lee McLean Manufacturing Company was putting out 300 dozen pads. That's 3,600 collar pads every day, and about 250 people were employed. McLean pads were sold all over the world. McLean's business grew and expanded in several factories across the country and even into Canada. He built the town of Attu, Georgia, with factories to supply the cotton in need. In 1912, he announced the new gift of a high school for the town of Greenfield. Construction was begun in 1914 with dedication in 1915. The first class to graduate from Edward Lee McLean School was in 1916. E.L. McLean expanded his products into other areas. One item he received a patent on was a rat trap, and as time went on, the automobile gradually replaced the horse by the means of transportation, and trucks replaced horse and wagon as means for hauling things. The need for horse collars gradually shrunk. The company had to find another product that it could make and sell. During World War II, the company manufactured thousands of sleeping bags and jungle hammocks. 200,827 life preservers were made for the armed forces. Life preservers saved many lives of soldiers and sailors on the torpedoed American ships after World War II and the Korean War. Main productions of these sleeping bags and hammocks were in sporting goods. The company made everything from life vests to lifeboat cushions to life preservers to hunting coats and sleeping bags and water skis that are still sold to this day. You can find them at Dick's Sporting Goods or any of those outdoorsy type stores. So, interesting note about Edward McLean. Mr. George had received news of Edward McLean's death in the morning mail. He sat in his office for a long time, holding the letter that announced the death of his friend, very quiet, tears in his eyes. Then he went about his daily duties. In the evening, they found him in his studio dead. He was attired in an artist's smock, which he always wore when he was at work. Nearby was the brush that he had just been using. On the easel, an unfinished painting. He had died, and as he would have desired it, doing the things he loved. His death occurred on May 9, 1934, and McLean died on May 2, 1934. So him and his best friend pretty much died around the same time. Now, there is a street named after Edward Lee McLean as well that's right by the school. He built all the houses for his employees so they wouldn't have to miss work. So is that cool? Or, I mean, back then I guess it was, because, you know, weather in Ohio can get crazy. Alright, so, speaking of the school, there was a ghost story about Edward Lee McLean's wife. So the high school was built in the late 1800s, which we just read that it was, you know, the first class graduated in 1916. McLean wanted a marble staircase. Mrs. McLean wanted to add a chandelier. He never put a chandelier up, and she died before they could put one up, because, you know, they were really going to have that happen. So after her death, the image of a big, beautiful chandelier can be seen at nighttime through the window on the second floor. There is no chandelier in this room, and it can be seen. It's like a phantom, almost like a reflection in the window that portrays to look like a chandelier, is what I've seen from it. It's above the entrance on the 6th Street on the side of the school. So that's not even where the marble staircase is. It's close, but it's not exactly in the same spot as the marble staircase, which is where you think a haunted chandelier would pop up. But anyway, moving on. So let's see, where am I at in my show notes here? The next creepy ghost story of our town, I'll leave it up to you, listener, to decide if you think it's a ghost story or not. This is the story of the kissing ghost. In a town as historic as Greenfield, there's bound to be a ghost story or two from the past. One series of articles from the 1881 Highland Weekly News chronicles the late tale of a mysterious apparition that frightened Greenfield citizens young and old. As the story goes, a strange woman dressed in black from head to toe wandered the Greenfield streets at night. Many daring teenagers attempt to speak to her, but she's said to have vanished into thin air right before their eyes. The entire town was abuzz about this rumor of the lady in black, and many found rational explanations for the sighting. Some thought she may be a wandering wife taking a late night break from her family, and others were convinced she was a young girl sneaking out to meet a secret lover. No matter the explanation, Greenfield's ghost frightened nearly everyone as it drifted through the streets. Local police even patrolled the town at night in an attempt to capture the ghost, but none of them could locate the phantom. The woman in black probably would have been considered a legend if prominent citizens hadn't witnessed her themselves. In January, John Wendy Harrison, come on, they call him Wendy, was startled so badly by the woman in black that he ran to the nearest shop and refused to go home without an escort. The local newspaper ran his story the next day, stating Harrison actually looks 10 years older since he saw the ghost, and is the laughingstock of the town. While the writers poked fun at Harrison, the town took the sighting seriously, as the police were actively involved in the search of a missing woman in black and constantly receiving calls about sightings. Greenfield citizens didn't have to wait long for the mystery to be solved. However, on February 23, 1881, the identity of the ghost of the woman in black was revealed, and it wasn't a ghost at all. In fact, it wasn't even a woman. While returning home from work one evening, Greenfield merchant Harry Evans felt that as if he was being watched. Soon he realized he was being followed by the notorious spirit. Instead of being frightened like Harrison did, he decided to put an end to the mystery, approached the ghostly figure, and demanded to know its identity. He soon realized that the phantom was quite human. Even Evans recognized it as a former Greenfield merchant, a recent patent of the Athens Asylum. The man had returned from the institution and had become despondent and prone to wandering the streets, dressed in a black coat, with a shawl that he wore over his head, appearing to all purposes of solemn a woman. The former shopkeeper had sent the Athens Asylum 2 years prior for a mental breakdown that had left him unable to function. The woman in black caused quite a stir in the town, but was eventually found taken back to the asylum. Thus, the mystery of the ghost was concluded. Now, there are different variations of this ghost story. There's some that they say that the mental institute thing didn't happen, that it was a teacher that had passed away, and you can find her grave at the old burial grounds by the Traveler's Rest. But yeah, so our town has a lot of weird ghost stories. It sure does. Let's see. Well, there you have it. All info can be found on the Greenfield Historical Society's web pages. References on the ghost stories can be found at Haunted Ohio. YouTube references can be found on my YouTube playlist for podcast references. All links are in the episode description. Before we go, gentle viewers, I have asked my husband's views on my hometown, from the perspective of someone not from Greenfield that resides here. So we're going to play that interview at the end of the episode. I hope you all have enjoyed this episode. Join me on the next new moon for the next new topic for Under the Moon Paranormal Ohio Legends. And always remember, folks, stay spooky. This is my husband, John. He was not born here in Greenfield, but he has resided in Greenfield for the past decade or more. So, John, what do you think about Greenfield and the school?
Greenfield most certainly has its ups and downs, has its good qualities and its bad. I think a lot of times it tries to be a little bit too much of a Hallmark channel and tries a little hard. That kind of rubs me the wrong way. When there's towns around like Courthouse that just seem to do it pretty naturally. As far as like the school, I'm not a big fan of the school district or the way certain things get handled, but you have to give them credit for their appreciation for art, and that comes from Edward H. McLean, right?
Edward Lee McLean.
Edward Lee McLean. So, I love the art aspect of what happens here in Greenfield. I love a lot about being here in Greenfield, but
they try too hard.
It is a try-hard little village.
Well, you heard it here first from a resident of Greenfield. Whoever that is back there, quit. Thanks for listening. Make sure to join us under the next full moon for the next spooky tale of Under the Moon Ohio Paranormal Legends.